I was standing in the middle of the electronics aisle, staring at the 60-inch ultra-high-definition television we had been discussing for months. It was supposed to be our anniversary gift to each other, a centerpiece for the living room renovations we had just finished. The salesman, a younger guy with too much gel in his hair, tapped his fingers on the counter while I inserted my chip card again. The terminal beeped a harsh rejection tone that seemed loud enough to echo through the entire store. "Declined," he said, not making eye contact this time. "Maybe try another one?" My stomach dropped. I knew there was money in that account. I pulled up my banking app, my thumb hovering over the screen, dread pooling in my chest. The balance was almost zero. A massive transfer had gone out 3 hours ago, initiating a pending review that froze the remaining scraps. It wasn't everything we owned, but it was enough to trigger fraud alerts and lock me out of my own life. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a hack. This wasn't a mistake. The destination account for the transfer was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately in my panic. Something was happening, something calculated and cold, and I didn't see it coming until the card reader flashed red. I paid with a credit card I kept for emergencies, my hands shaking slightly as I signed the receipt. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and racing thoughts. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always did, warm, inviting, a lie. I walked through the front door, half expecting chaos, but silence greeted me instead. Chloe was sitting at the kitchen island, a cup of tea in front of her, her hands clasped on the marble countertop. She didn't look up when I entered. She looked like she had been practicing this pose for hours.
"I've filed for divorce," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly even. There were no tears, no screaming, no accusations, just a flat statement of fact, like she was telling me we were out of milk. She finally looked at me, her eyes dry and hard. She was waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to yell, to demand answers about the money, to give her a reason to villainize me. But I just nodded. I took a breath, walked to the fridge, and got a glass of water. My silence unnerved her more than any screaming match could have. She shifted in her seat, the first crack in her armor appearing as I simply refused to play the part she had written for me. Let me pause here and tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. I'm a guy who believes in stability. I'm in my mid-30s, and for the last 7 years, I have built my entire world around this marriage. I'm not the type to throw punches or smash plates. I'm the guy who handles the insurance, who fixes the leaky faucet on a Sunday morning, who invested my bonuses into our future instead of buying a sports car. I trusted Chloe implicitly. I thought we were a team. People often mistake my quiet nature for weakness. They think because I don't raise my voice, I don't have a backbone. Chloe certainly thought so. She built her entire exit strategy on the assumption that I would crumble, that I would be too emotional to think straight or too passive to fight back. She thought she was leaving a man who would beg her to stay. But standing in that kitchen, watching the woman I loved turn into a stranger, something inside me shifted. I realized that the man she thought she knew didn't exist anymore. In his place was someone cold, observant, and ready to protect himself. She wanted a chaotic victim. Instead, she got a strategist. Over the next few days, the fog of shock began to lift, replaced by a forensic need to understand what had happened. I started digging through our shared digital life, looking for the cracks I had missed. It didn't take long. Once I looked past the surface, the betrayal was everywhere.
There were small withdrawals from our savings account dating back 4 months, amounts small enough to look like groceries or gas, but frequent enough to add up. I found subscriptions to services we didn't use, cloud storage accounts I didn't have access to, and a gym membership across town that she had never mentioned. The divorce wasn't a sudden decision she made after a bad week. It was a project she had been managing for months. She had been siphoning resources, preparing her landing pad, and detaching herself from our life while still sleeping in my bed. The large transfer at the electronics store was just the final step, the go signal. Realizing the timeline made me feel sick, physically ill, but it also gave me clarity. This wasn't an emotional crisis. It was a business transaction to her. And if she wanted to treat our marriage like a failed business merger, I had to stop thinking like a husband and start thinking like a CEO facing a hostile takeover. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. We were sleeping in separate rooms, moving around each other like ghosts. I could tell she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She expected me to beg. She wanted the validation of my grief. I heard from a mutual friend, Mark, that she was already spinning the narrative. She told people I was fragile and falling apart, positioning herself as the strong one who had to make a tough choice. "He's just so emotional," she had told them. "I'm worried he won't be able to handle this." It was a trap. If I got angry, I proved her right. If I begged, I looked pathetic. She was banking on my predictability. That night, I made a vow to myself in the darkness of the guest room. I would not give her a single ounce of fuel. I would be a gray rock, uninteresting, unresponsive, and impenetrable. I decided to act completely differently than the version of me she expected. I wouldn't be the fragile husband. I would be the cooperative roommate. Every time she tried to bait me into an argument, I responded with polite indifference. It drove her crazy. I could see it in the way she clenched her jaw. But it was the only leverage I had. Instead of confronting her about the money or the lies, I turned to my laptop. I spent my nights scouring divorce forums, reading Reddit confessionals, and studying legal advice for fathers and husbands in my state. I learned quickly that the legal system does not reward emotion. It rewards documentation. It rewards the person who keeps their head while the other person is losing theirs. I read stories of men who lost everything because they acted out of anger, sending nasty texts or emptying accounts in retaliation. I learned that patience was a weapon. I started mapping out the legal process. I learned about asset division, about alimony, about the importance of timelines. I realized that her moving the money might actually hurt her if I played it right. It looked like bad faith. It looked like financial abuse. But I couldn't just scream that in court. I had to prove it. I stopped looking at her as my wife and started looking at her as the opposing counsel. I needed to be smarter, not louder. The research gave me something to focus on, a way to channel the burning rage in my gut into something productive. I wasn't just sitting there taking it. I was preparing for war, quietly. A week later, I was in the garage, ostensibly looking for some boxes to help pack her things, a gesture of goodwill that she viewed as submission. I was moving a stack of old winter coats when a small, hard object fell out of the pocket of her old ski jacket. It was a smartphone, an older model with a cracked screen. My heart rate spiked. I knew she had upgraded her phone a year ago, but I thought she had traded this one in. I took it to the garage workbench and plugged it in. It still held a charge. My hands trembled as I swiped the screen. It wasn't passcoded. And there it was, the smoking gun. It wasn't just financial betrayal, it was emotional. There were months of messages between her and a name listed as project manager. But the texts weren't about work. They were intimate, mocking, and cruel. They talked about me. They planned their future. They joked about how easy it would be to leave me once the assets were secured. I stood there in the dusty garage reading the evidence of my own humiliation. I wanted to smash the phone. I wanted to storm upstairs and throw it in her face. But I didn't. I unplugged it, put it in my pocket, and went back to packing boxes. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office with the door locked, and I documented everything. I took photos of the text messages from the burner phone. I downloaded our bank statements for the last 3 years and highlighted every suspicious transaction in yellow. I created a spreadsheet that correlated her late nights at work with the timestamps of the messages on the hidden phone. I was building a dossier. It was grueling work. Every screenshot was a fresh wound, a reminder of how blind I had been. But I forced myself to detach. I treated it like a project at work. Fact: withdrawal of $500. Date: June 12th. Corroborating evidence: text message to project manager about a weekend getaway. I organized it all into a digital folder and a physical binder. I knew that in a no-fault divorce state, infidelity might not matter for the divorce decree itself, but it mattered for the narrative. It mattered for leverage. And the financial malfeasance, that mattered to a judge. I wasn't collecting accusations. I was collecting ammunition. I made backups of backups. I was going to be the most prepared person in the room. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Mr. Sterling. He was expensive, the kind of lawyer you hire when you want to win, not just settle. I took a half-day off work, telling Chloe I had a dentist appointment. I walked into his office with my binder tucked under my arm. I laid it all out for him: the money transfer, the burner phone, the timeline. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable, until he stopped at the bank statements. He looked up at me over his glasses. "You haven't confronted her about any of this?" he asked. "No," I said. "I haven't said a word." A slow smile spread across his face. "Good," he said. "Right now, your silence is your advantage. She thinks she's fighting a man who is confused and hurt. She doesn't know she's fighting a man who has receipts." He explained that if she knew what I knew, she would destroy evidence or hide assets better. My silence allowed her to continue making mistakes. It allowed her to keep leaving a paper trail because she thought no one was watching. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a client with a strategy. Back at home, the performance continued. I played the role of the defeated husband perfectly. I asked her questions like, "Are you sure this is what you want?" and "Can we at least be civil?" knowing exactly what she would say. She became visibly relaxed. She stopped taking her phone into the bathroom. She left her laptop open on the coffee table. She grew careless because she had categorized me as harmless. Her arrogance was staggering. She truly believed she had outsmarted me so thoroughly that she didn't even need to keep her guard up. One evening, she even asked me for help with her car insurance, which was still under my name. I helped her, polite and helpful. "Thanks," she said, almost pityingly. "You're taking this better than I thought." I just shrugged and said, "I just want to be fair." Internally, I was screaming, but externally, I was the picture of resignation. This overconfidence was her fatal flaw. She started transferring small amounts of money again, thinking I was too depressed to check the accounts. She didn't know that every single cent she moved was being tracked by a forensic accountant Mr. Sterling had recommended. She was digging her own grave, dollar by dollar. Then came the first real countermove.
Chloe tried to initiate another large transfer, this time from an investment portfolio we shared. She likely wanted to secure a deposit for a new apartment she had been eyeing. But this time, the screen didn't just say pending review, it said transaction denied, account frozen. She stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger. "Why can't I access the investment account?" she demanded. "Did you change the password?" I looked up from my book, keeping my face completely blank. "I didn't change the password," I said calmly, "but my lawyer advised me to freeze all joint assets until we have a temporary separation agreement. It's standard procedure to protect us both." The color drained from her face. "You have a lawyer?" she whispered. I thought we were doing this amicably." "We are," I said, my voice steady, "but we need to do it correctly." This was the first time she realized she wasn't the only one driving the car. The financial safeguard wasn't just about money, it was a signal. It told her that I was awake. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The mask slipped completely after that. The calm, regretful wife vanished, and the angry, entitled adversary appeared. She started accusing me of being manipulative, of trying to control her, of financial abuse. Ironic, considering she had tried to empty our accounts first. "You're trying to trap me," she screamed one night, throwing a pillow across the room. "You're just doing this to punish me because I fell out of love with you." I remained seated, hands folded. "I'm just following legal advice, Chloe," I said. "If you have concerns, your lawyer can call mine." My refusal to engage in the drama infuriated her. She wanted a fight, because a fight would justify her actions. A fight would make me the bad guy. But by staying calm, I forced her to sit with her own behavior. She escalated, sending nasty texts, slamming doors, trying to provoke a reaction that she could use against me. But I gave her nothing. I was a wall, and the harder she threw herself against the wall, the more she revealed her true character. I saved every text, recorded every outburst, legal in my state, and added it to the pile. The narrative she had carefully constructed for our social circle began to crumble. She had told everyone I was unstable, that I was making things impossible. But then our friends started seeing the reality. They saw me at the grocery store, calm and collected. They saw her social media posts becoming increasingly erratic and aggressive. One of her close friends, a woman named Tara, ran into me at a coffee shop. She looked uncomfortable, expecting me to badmouth Chloe. Instead, I smiled and asked how her kids were. When she tentatively brought up the divorce, I simply said, "It's unfortunate, but I want what's best for both of us. I just want a fair resolution." Tara looked confused. "That's not what Chloe said. She said you were freezing her out and hiding money." I shook my head gently. "I'm just ensuring everything is split legally. I'm sorry she feels that way." I didn't need to defend myself. My behavior stood in stark contrast to her hysteria. Slowly, the text messages from mutual friends changed from accusatory to sympathetic. They started noticing the discrepancies. The story she told couldn't survive the weight of the truth I was living. Mediation day arrived. We sat in a conference room with a long mahogany table. Chloe, her lawyer, me, and Mr. Sterling. The mediator, a retired judge, sat at the head. Chloe started strong. She demanded the house, full spousal support, and 60% of our retirement assets. She played the victim card hard, talking about the emotional toll I had taken on her. Her lawyer seemed confident, expecting me to roll over to make it stop. I sat quietly, letting her finish. Then Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "We believe those demands are ambitious," he said.
He opened my binder. He laid out the timeline of the withdrawals she made prior to filing. He showed the mediator that documented evidence of the funds she had already siphoned, arguing that this should be deducted from her share. The mediator's eyebrows shot up. "Is this accurate?" he asked Chloe's lawyer. Her lawyer shuffled his papers, looking flustered. "We would need to verify these figures," he stammered. Chloe looked furious, but for the first time, she also looked scared. She realized she wasn't negotiating with a doormat. She was negotiating with a fortress. Then came the moment that truly shifted the ground beneath her feet. We were discussing the division of debt. Chloe was arguing that I should take on the credit card debt because she had sacrificed her career for me. A blatant lie, as she worked full-time. Mr. Sterling waited for a pause and then casually slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a log of the travel expenses charged to our joint card. Flights and hotels for two, booked for weekends when she said she was visiting her mother. "We are also concerned about the dissipation of marital assets for non-marital purposes," Mr. Sterling said smoothly. He didn't say affair. He didn't say cheating. He just pointed to the money spent on another person. Chloe went pale. She refused to look at the paper. She refused to look at me. The energy in the room sucked inward. Her lawyer looked at the document, then at Chloe, and I saw the resignation in his eyes. He knew they had lost the moral high ground. The mediator looked at the evidence and then back at Chloe with a stern expression. Control had shifted quietly but decisively to my side of the table. The settlement negotiation that followed was swift. Her aggressive demands evaporated. Her lawyer pulled her into the hallway for a heated whisper session. When they came back, the bluster was gone. They agreed to a split that was far more favorable to me than I had originally hoped for. I kept the house. I kept my retirement. She got her car and a fair share of the savings, minus the funds she had already borrowed. She signed the papers with a shaking hand. She didn't look like a winner. She looked like someone who had gambled everything on a bluff and been called. I watched her, not with triumph, but with a profound sense of relief. It wasn't about hurting her. It was about ensuring she couldn't hurt me anymore. She had miscalculated everything: my intelligence, my resolve, and my capacity for silence. She thought she was playing chess against a pigeon, only to realize she was playing against a grandmaster who had been studying the board while she was busy bragging about her victory. A week after the papers were finalized and signed, I was in the driveway, loading the last of her boxes into a moving van she had hired. She walked up to me, looking smaller than I remembered. The anger was gone, replaced by a strange, unsure nostalgia. "It didn't have to be this ugly, you know," she said, her voice trembling. "If you had just talked to me." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. "I didn't make it ugly, Chloe," I said softly. "I just made it true." She looked at me, searching for the man who used to adore her, the man she could manipulate, but he wasn't there. "I guess I didn't really know you," she whispered. "No," I replied. "You didn't." As she drove away, I didn't feel the crushing sadness I expected. I felt light. My silence hadn't been weakness. It had been the ultimate form of discipline. I had protected my dignity by refusing to engage in her chaos. I sold the house a month later. It was too big, too full of memories I didn't want. I moved into a smaller place, a modern condo with a view of the city and quiet neighbors. It was a fresh start. I bought furniture that I liked. I painted the walls colors that she would have hated.
I started sleeping through the night for the first time in a year. I focused on myself. I hit the gym, not for revenge, but for my own health. I reconnected with old friends who I had drifted from during the marriage. I realized how much of myself I had suppressed to keep the peace with her. The freedom was intoxicating. It wasn't the wild, party-filled freedom she had been chasing. It was the freedom of peace, the freedom of knowing that my bank account was safe, my heart was healing, and my future was entirely my own. I had walked through fire and come out unburned because I refused to fan the flames. When I tell this story to friends now, or to the anonymous void of the internet, people always ask how I kept my cool. They ask how I didn't explode when I found the phone or when she drained the account. And I tell them the truth. Staying quiet was my strength. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the only thing that saved me. In a situation designed to overwhelm you, silence is the only thing you can control. By not reacting, I denied her the narrative she wanted. I avoided the muddy waters of he said, she said. I preserved my dignity when she was trying to strip it away. I strategically outmaneuvered a person who thought she held all the cards simply by refusing to show her mine. I learned that you don't win a divorce by hurting the other person. You win by saving yourself. And the best way to save yourself is to shut your mouth, open your eyes, and play the long game. Looking back at the man I was in that electronics store, panic-stricken, confused, terrified, I almost want to hug him. I want to tell him that it's going to be okay, that he's stronger than he thinks. But I also wonder what would have happened if I had chosen the other path, if I had gone home and screamed, if I had begged her to stay, if I had confronted her the moment I found that phone. I truly believe I would have lost everything. I would have lost my leverage in court. I would have lost my reputation with our friends. And most importantly, I would have lost my self-respect. I walked away with my dignity intact, and that is worth more than any house or bank account. So I leave you with this question, for anyone staring down the barrel of a betrayal. When your world is falling apart, do you scream at the storm, or do you build a shelter? Because I know what I did, and I know I'd do it again in a heartbeat. What would you have done in my place?